Hey guys, welcome to my channel. I hope you're all doing very well. So I just watched Killing Eve season 3 episodes 1 and 2. Let's talk about it. So Killing Eve has quickly become one of my very favorite shows. I started watching it in December and I binge watched the whole first 2 seasons. So this is the first time that I'm having to actually wait every single week for new episodes and I absolutely hate it. I despise it. I actually thought that they were going to drop all of the episodes at once and I thought, okay, I'd be able to review this show last week, no problem. Weekly? Absolutely not. I'm going insane here. So for the first time on my channel, instead of doing a season review like I usually do with these TV shows, I'm going to be doing an episode 1 and 2 and kind of reviewing this show every 2 weeks as opposed to every single week because we've got a lot going on next week. So the gang is back for season 3 and we're picking up where we left off after season 2 where Eve was shot by Villanelle in this huge moment, and of course she didn't end up dead, but she did end up very much wounded, and I'm not just talking physically. And she definitely is going through a moment right now. She's in a very depressive state after everything that happened with MI6 and with Villanelle and the whole shebang. So we're following a very different version of Eve. She's no longer driven by her work. She's just going by day and she's very depressed right now. And in episode 1, we discover that she's working in a restaurant, even though she's more than capable of getting a better job, but it just doesn't seem like she's in that headspace right now. Now it's in episode 1 where Kenny comes along and tells Eve that he has still been investigating the 12. He's still looking into exactly what's going on with that organization that Villanelle works for. And even though Eve is insistent that she's no longer interested in any of that stuff, Kenny is still investigating and looking into it. And he's using his workplace computer to do so. And of course that leads to that horrible incident that happens to him at the end of the first episode. But before we get to that heartbreaking moment, we're going to talk about what Villanelle is up to, because when we find her in the first episode of this season, she is getting married, or she's just gotten married to this woman in Spain who's a very wealthy woman clearly, and Villanelle is pretty much only interested in her for that money, honey. She is so blasé to the fact that this woman means absolutely nothing to her that she even spells it out clearly for the rest of her family, and everyone's trying to figure out, is this woman joking? Or does she have some kind of dark sense of humor? Like, what's going on here? Because why on earth would she just admit that she's basically a gold digger in front of the woman's entire family? But Villanelle right now isn't even thinking about that because she is distracted by the presence of who we find out to be Dasha. And we find out that she was Villanelle's old mentor and she taught her a lot of what Villanelle knows now. So then they have this whole brouhaha in the middle of the wedding, and then the bride's family starts fighting as well. And I'm like, why are you guys fighting? Did you guys bring beef onto this wedding as well? Like, why are you adding to the situation? But anyway, so then Dasha and Villanelle have this chat, and Villanelle tells her that the only way that she is coming back to work as an assassin in that organization is if they give her a promotion, as well as following some of her demands. And we see in the second episode that Dasha does her best to meet some of Villanelle's demands by giving her this grand house with great water pressure and also she's helping her in her path to becoming a keeper. But Dasha makes it very, very clear that if Villanelle is actually interested in becoming a keeper, she needs to show that she's good with responsibility and actually having responsibility over another assassin. Now we know from seasons past that Villanelle does not like to work with other people. Oh no, she's a one-woman show. She cannot work in a team whatsoever because every single time she works in a team, her teammates end up dead. Unless of course we're talking about Eve. She has absolutely no problem teaming up with Eve. So Villanelle is forced to babysit this newcomer in order to prove herself as a potential keeper, and this guy clearly is just so out of his league. I don't even know how he signed up or applied to be an assassin. Maybe they blackmailed him. I think that's what happened, is he killed all of those people because of what they said to his boyfriend or how they were treating his boyfriend, and the organization used that against him and said, look, if you don't join us, you're going to end up in prison, so you may as well. But he's clearly nowhere near at the caliber of Villanelle, and you can tell already that she's just going to get so frustrated with his incompetence. The two end up going together on a mission at a birthday party where the Mark is present, and they're dressed up as clowns, and you can tell that Villanelle is just not having a single second of it. Like, she is not here for it. I thought she would at least like pretend to entertain the kids even for a moment, but absolutely not. She might act childlike, but she does not get down with kids whatsoever. We saw that in the previous seasons, and we're certainly seeing it in this episode, and it's absolutely hilarious. But of course, just as we all suspected, even though Villanelle gave him very clear, simple instructions, the new guy couldn't measure up. He ends up a bloody mess on the floor fighting his target, and Villanelle's just looking at him like, oh, you're such a disappointment, you're a mess. And at first you think that they had a connection because they bonded over their exes and their pain of unrequited love, but then you see just how horribly the new guy handled his first mission, and Villanelle is not here for patience. She doesn't have time, so she kills both his target and him, which again, like I said, she doesn't do teamwork. What did you expect? And I actually suspect that Dasha knows this about Villanelle, and she knows that working in a team with someone else is just going to be impossible for her. And I think she's banking on the fact that Villanelle would just flop so many times that the 12 won't even consider her as a keeper anyways. And speaking of Dasha herself, I think she's a very interesting new character to introduce to the series. I really like the fact that she has a rapport with Villanelle that is very different to the one that she has with Constantine. Like, they have a father-daughter kind of relationship, whereas Dasha feels like her crazy aunt. But she was also an assassin in her heyday, and you see that at the beginning of episode 1 where she killed that guy and then stuffed his mouth with chalk and covered him with chalk all over. Even though he was the sweetest guy and he had flowers ready for her and he just wanted to support her and be kind to her, but she wasn't having any of that, so she ends up killing him. And I believe that was her very first kill when she was younger, and apparently she has this whole reputation of her own because Villanelle has definitely been, you know, looking up to her to some extent, or at least copying some of her signature tropes, which we saw in the first episode when she used the, is it saffron or the turmeric or something, to cover that woman in the shop with after she killed her as well. So I'd be really interested to see if this season explores how Villanelle came to be this powerful and proficient assassin, especially as we have this looking glass in the form of Dasha, who knows her history and knows how she started off. And I think last season very much focused on who Villanelle was before she became an assassin and what led her to this path. And I think going on this journey along with her through Dasha would be really interesting to build that character. And I also think it's really interesting to see Villanelle interacting with someone else that's part of their organization that isn't Constantine or isn't another keeper who she's just going to end up killing anyways, because she definitely has a very antagonistic relationship with Dasha. Constantine even says that Villanelle had the intention of killing Dasha at one point, but now she's siding with her because she wants this promotion. But I think it's really interesting to see that relationship, and I think there might be some deception perhaps on both sides when it comes to Dasha and Villanelle, especially considering that an undercurrent of their mentor-mentee relationship is the fact that Villanelle may have actually outshone Dasha over the years, and Dasha is very protective and very defensive when it comes to her legacy in the field. And speaking of Constantine, we do get a reunion between Villanelle and Constantine at the end of the second episode, where he reveals to Villanelle that Eve is in fact still alive, because this entire time Villanelle has been walking around these streets thinking that Eve is dead, when in fact she is alive. She survived that shot somehow. And you can just see the reaction. Oh, Jodie Comer is just absolutely amazing, just all around when it comes to this show. But the reaction on her face, you can see the emotions passing through. She's shocked. She's in disbelief at first. She doesn't believe it. She's like, no, there's no way. There's no way that she could survive. And then Constantine's like, but you left her. You left her hanging in that emotional outburst that you had. You weren't thinking straight. Instead of thinking like a proper assassin, you were busy thinking like a heartbroken lover. So you left her there instead of checking to see if your Mark was actually killed. And then the emotions on her face just shift into madness. I think a part of her is happy that Eve is alive, and she's happy to have that person who was her match, because everyone else is just so beneath her, at least in her eyes. But Eve was the first person who actually brought her excitement and actually felt like a worthy adversary to her. And now let's go back to Eve herself. Now, when it comes to this series, whilst I love Sandra Oh, I think she's fantastic here, when it comes to the scenes that are just surrounding Eve and her investigations, or her working in MI6, or what she's doing now, which is just lazing around and being depressed, I have never really been that much of a fan of those scenes. I much prefer it when, one, we have Villanelle on screen. She's always gold. I love seeing what she's up to all the time. Or two, when we have Eve and Villanelle on screen. That's just electric. electric. That chemistry is insane. That's why we ship them, even though Villanelle is literally the devil and she should not be anywhere near anyone, let alone Eve. But that's why it works so well, because they have that insanely amazing chemistry. And I think that's where the show really shines. But of course, every single season we have these episodes where, you know, everyone is kind of separate doing their own thing, and then they converge together in this storyline. And at this point in time, we're kind of in that separate mode where both of them have realized that they're both back on the scene. You know, Villanelle has just realized that Eve is still alive, and Eve also realizes in episode 2 that Villanelle is still doing her work. You know, she's still working out here on these streets because of the kill that she made in Spain using Dasha's signature, although it was like turmeric or something instead of chalk. Having said that though, the first episode definitely opened up this season with one of the biggest, most heartbreaking moments of the entire show, and that is with the tragic death of Kenny. I can't begin to express how upset I am that they killed off Kenny. I think Kenny was a fantastic character. He was so different. He was very socially awkward, just like his mother. But at the same time, he just felt like this bright light of innocence in this dark, dangerous, dingy world. And I was so sad to see him go. Why did they have to kill off Kenny? Kill off someone else who matters. Well, that's the problem, is that in this show, there's only about 5 people who matter. And he, unfortunately, was one of them. And in order for there to be any stakes, they had to kill him off. But I'm still upset. I understand the reasoning behind it, and I think it was a really cool twist at the end, but I'm still upset. And in episode 2, we have his funeral, and an already depressed Eve is there, and she is just absolutely wasted. And she has this constant confrontation with this guy who she bumped into in the funeral, and it turns out that he was actually Kenny's boss at the online publication that he was working at, because he believes that Kenny was looking into something pretty dark and dangerous over there, and he wanted to find out what it was, because he isn't convinced even for a minute that Kenny killed himself by jumping off of that building. So I'm really interested to see what they end up digging up on Kenny's laptop, his USB I believe, and his phone, as well as finding out what it was that may have led to him being killed. And it was just so upsetting, because I was already sad from episode 1 about his death, but then in this episode they show us just how well he was doing. He was moving on with his life, working at this online publication, which wasn't the most fulfilling thing for him. He was obviously interested in other things, digging up the 12 and whatnot, but he had a girlfriend and he was doing well. Like, he was living his best Kenny life, and we had to kill him off in the first episode of season 3. Why? And then finally we also have a reunion between Carolyn and Eve, actually a couple of them, and in the later reunion we have Eve showing up at Carolyn's house, and Carolyn is obviously not in a great headspace right now. People at MI6 are telling her, you know, you should just take a break, you shouldn't be working right now because your son just died. Her new supervisor, who she absolutely despises and who is obviously a jerk, but he makes a good point. She needs to take a moment to herself to process this huge thing that just happened. But Eve shows up at her house and her daughter is also present, and I find it hilarious that her daughter is like a huge empath and she soaks up other people's emotions, whereas the other two are clearly not as emotional, and they're very resistant to emotions, especially Carolyn. But also Kenny, like, he warmed up to Eve, but it took him a moment to do so, and he was very socially awkward. That's a really cool family dynamic that they had going on there. And also Carolyn has one of the funniest lines of the whole episode where her daughter is there and Eve wants to speak to her in private, so she tells her daughter, why don't you go, like, close your eyes and breathe? And her daughter's like, you mean sleep? Like, she's like a robot. Like, it's crazy. But obviously the impact of her son's death is definitely shown in this episode. So Eve approaches Carolyn with Kenny's phone, and she tells her that she needs to get into this phone in order to find out exactly what happened. Maybe there's clues in there. And all this time, that's when Constantine is listening in using that little fridge magnet that he gave to the daughter, and he's listening and he hears that Eve is still alive, and that's when he ends up telling Villanelle that Eve is still alive and that her ex-girlfriend is still around to torment her. So overall, I think the first 2 episodes of Killing Eve season 3 have been very interesting. I did think that episode 1 was a bit slower than I would have liked. Of course, you had that bombastic ending with Kenny's death, but other than that, I definitely felt like it was a rehash of what happened in the previous season and just kind of getting you up to date with everyone's position at the beginning of season 3. But season 2 very much picked up in terms of both with what was happening, but also just the writing and the scenes, they felt a bit more sharp and a bit more interesting, and I'm very interested to see where we go along from here. Obviously, I feel like we're going to see more of Villanelle with Dasha, and I think, again, there is some deception there. I don't think Dasha is on Villanelle's side, and I don't think the only thing that Dasha wants in exchange for helping Villanelle is to go home. I'm not sure about that. I think there's something else at play here. And also, I hope we find out more about the 12 this season. I always found it bizarre that MI6 was so intent on finding Villanelle instead of finding whoever it was that hired her. Like, that should be their focus. She's just a gun for hire, but who's doing the hiring? Who's the one that's actually organizing this whole network of assassins? Because that's where the money is. That's where you need to be getting down on your investigating skills, because they are the real threat here. And of course, like I said, I'm so excited to see more scenes between Eve and Villanelle. I hope they come sooner rather than later, because I do think that that is where the show really shines, is with their scenes together. Oh, like I said, the chemistry is insane. It's electric. It is why we tune in. So that's it from me. Now that I told you guys about my thoughts on Killing Eve season 3 episodes 1 and 2, it's time for you guys to let me know what you thought of the first 2 episodes of this season down in the comments below. So the next video on this show that I'll have up for you guys will be on my review for episodes 3 and 4, which I'm very excited about. Again, I wish they would just drop the whole season at once. It would be so much easier and so much more satisfying, I think, as well. But anyway, please be sure to subscribe so you can catch those videos coming up. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate it, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.